I would like to welcome our audience. My name is Selin Calik. I'm journalist and doctorate researcher based in London. I'm also Associate Director of International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, which is sponsoring series of podcasts named as The Crisis. So today we are going to kick off our podcast on Rohingya genocide. It is my privilege to host Burmese academic Dr. Maung Zarni. Welcome, Maung Zarni.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on this show.
Zarni is a co-founder of 4C.co, and he's the author of The Enemy of the State Speaks, irreverent essays and interviews. He is one person who can claim a prominent role in getting Myanmar to answer genocide charges at an international court. He is Dr. Maung Zarni, and Zarni, he was born in Mandalay and left Myanmar just before the 1980 nation uprising and went to the United States, where he earned a PhD from University of Wisconsin, Madison, in 1998. And Zarni was one of the founders of Free Burma Coalition that urged the world to impose sanctions on the military junta. And he was one of the first accused the government of committing genocide against the Rohingya in the aftermath of the communal violence that erupted in Rakhine in 2012. At academic seminars, he has helped to arrange in Southeast Asia and Europe. Maung Zarni, who now lives in United Kingdom, has argued that the Rohingya are undergoing the successive stages of genocide. So, Zarni, my first question is, in the case of Rohingya, we have been engaged in different ways of killings since 1978, when the Burmese military decided that this community must not be allowed to exist as Rohingya, and their numbers must be reduced by terrorizing them. So they would run away to Bangladesh or other places. They decided that. Mr. Zarni, you are one of the prominent Buddhist academic, and you support Rohingya Muslims. How did the genocide take place? Why do you oppose the genocide as a Buddhist?
Well, thank you, Elif. Just want to make a mention that your introduction is very glowing, and I don't think I deserve any credit for getting Myanmar to the ICJ. So there are lawyers and other prominent organizations that deserve that credit, and it's not me. And so, but thank you for your kind introduction. Um, how did the Burmese uh, military junta, you know, begin to frame the Rohingya? Will go to the heart of that question. Yeah, there have been massive documentation about the policies and practices of persecution, targeting Rohingya people on the basis of their identity, starting with the non, you know, recognition that they exist and existed historically and existed officially in post-independence Burma since 1948. I think the crucial issue is, why are Rohingya people who occupy the border areas of Burmese and Bangladeshi boundaries, yeah? Whereas in fact there are also other such borderland communities, in essentially every part of Burmese borders because geographically we share borders with the five different Asian countries. China, India, uh, Laos, and Thailand, and of course Bangladesh. And Bangladeshi border is probably or among the shortest border, only 270 miles. Yeah? Whereas in fact, India and Chinese borders are over 1,000 miles long. Each borders with Burma, and there are similarly situated communities whose presence, historical presence, and cultures and linguistic traditions predate both the British colonial rule and the emergence of modern Burma. So the question is, why have the Burmese military leaders and why have the Burmese public singled the Rohingyas out? Out of, say about 10 different ethnic communities that can similarly belong to countries on either side of the border. Yeah?
Mhm.
This is not a new phenomena. This also is found in the Balkans. Across different borders, people have lived, for centuries, and this is also found in the heart of Europe. Say, for instance, Poland. Germany. People live across borders when borders, um, you know, were not hard. In other words, the borders are not guarded. Yeah. And so the reason the Burmese military, the primary reason the Burmese military single out the Rohingyas is based on their demographic and military strategic reasoning.
Mhm.
Muslim communities, in other words, pockets of Muslims across or throughout Burma, and none of these 17 different types of Muslims uh, have been singled out to, to subject to genocidal policy. Yes, discrimination. Yes, there are occasional violence. Yes, that the exclusion and the treatment of Muslims as second class in the rest of Burma. However, none of those communities is subjected to the persecution that amounts to genocide, except Rohingya, because Rohingyas are the only Muslim community in Burma that have a defined, geographic region of northern Arakan or northern Rakhine state, which is next to Bangladesh. Yeah? And they are that region. They call it their historical and ancestral home, and also they happen to be next to one of the largest Muslim countries in the world, Bangladesh, with 160 plus million predominantly Muslim population. So in the and because the borders between Burma and Bangladesh, or formerly East Pakistan, or historically East Bengal, had never been hard borders. So there are two communities, either Bengalis or Bangladeshi, and the Rohingyas on the Burmese side. They intermingle, racially, culturally, linguistically, commercially, yeah, and demographically. So these border, and because of that border fluidity, because of the fact that the community is Muslims, yeah,
Yes.
and the Burmese military decided that if Bangladesh decided to take a piece of Burmese land or Western Burma, this Rohingya community could become a proxy, to be used by Bangladesh. So this has been a preemptive genocide. In other words, a genocide that is presented to the Burmese public as a self-defense, preemptive self-defense against Muslim takeover of Western Burma. That is one rationale and one strategic justification. The other one relates to the racist and blatantly racist and ideological component. The Burmese military falsely you know revise the history of Rakhine or ancient Arakan, which was an independent kingdom until 1785. That is, until 6 years after the French Revolution. This region of Rakhine or Arakan was independent, an independent kingdom, coastal and cosmopolitan kingdom. That was snatched by the Burmese Buddhists. This is like two kingdoms, Buddhist kingdoms, one militarily stronger, taking over, destroying another Buddhist kingdom, and annexing their land. So the refugee crisis, the crisis of the Rohingyas, did not start, just a few years ago. It started in the late 1970s. And so the Burmese, in their eyes, particularly the generals, Rakhine State was, in quotes, purely Buddhist region until the arrival of Muslims. So the generals wanted to restore and purify this region to the original state where only Buddhists live. So it's similar to what Hitler attempted to do in Nazi Germany. They think that the Jews in Germany, whether they have lived there for 2 generations or 5,000, 1,000 years, it did not matter to the Nazis. What matters is Germany is only for Aryan Germans, and the rest of the population needed to be exterminated. So we have a parallel case in Burma. The only difference here is Hitler and the Nazis had only 12 years, from 1933 to 1945, when Auschwitz was closed, to do their extermination project, the final solution. Whereas, in fact, the Burmese military and now the government of Aung San Suu Kyi supporting the military, they have had 40 years to do this nasty genocide.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your answer. We have been witnessing that the government has often restricted access to this region, northern Rakhine State, for the journalists and also aid workers. So you are very well experienced academic. So what kind of restrictions you experienced as an academic and activist? And what kind of price have you paid? And has this price been worth paying? I would like to ask.
Well, I think for the journalists as well, I mean, particularly for the residents of Rakhine, the most of the severe restrictions include restriction on the flow of news and information. Yeah? And so they apparent now the internet ban on Rakhine State has been imposed since last year. It's now like 13 months of internet ban. Imagine living in a vast prison camp where there is no information coming in. Yeah? So that's the scenario that the people in Rakhine are experiencing, right? And the other one thing we need to mention is now the the Burmese government resorts to genocidal policies and practices against the Muslims, yeah, known as Rohingya. There's also other types of Muslim. They too are subject to, similarly, the severe persecution. But since the fighting between the Arakan army, which is representing the majority Buddhist Rakhine people. They have been fighting to reclaim essentially autonomy and ultimately their liberation or sovereignty. And this Arakan army is not a racist organization, and they have made statements repeatedly that they are moving away from the racist and religiously based ideology of the Burmese military, and the older generations of Buddhist Rakhines who share the racism with the Burmese against the Muslims and against the Rohingya. So this is a progressive armed organization known as Arakan Army, led by young progressive Rakhine Buddhists who say anyone who love the Rakhine state, who were born there, who want to make home in that Rakhine state, they will be, re identified as Arakanis, because Arakani is the old or ancient historic identity for anyone who lived in Arakan during the time Arakan was a cosmopolitan coastal kingdom. So it transcends racial or ethnic identity, or it transcends religious identity. People of Arakan at the time did not promote themselves as Buddhists or Muslims or Rakhine or Rohingya. They identified themselves as Arakanis. So this armed movement has been engaged in fightings with the Burmese military over the last 7 months, and as a result, there have been, Buddhist refugees in Rakhine State. 200,000 Buddhist refugees, yeah, have been displaced, or the Buddhists have been displaced from homes. The army or the Burmese military bombed their villages from the air, and also they just last week the Burmese military cut off food supplies to 40 Buddhist villages. Yeah. So there are two things going on, because your podcast is, identified as the crisis. There are two crises going on in Rakhine State. One is the genocide, and it's spilled over 1 million refugees in Bangladesh, and today there are 4 times more Rohingyas outside of their homeland in Arakan than there are inside. Only 500,000 Rohingyas are left. The Burmese have accomplished, much of their genocidal project. Now the Rakhines are being subject, not to the extent the Rohingyas suffer, but a rather severe colonial occupation, yeah, similar to what the Palestinians experience under Israeli occupation of West Bank and Gaza. And in terms of like restriction on, or like the risks and the cost of being engaged in this type of the activism, that I'm involved in, or other people, but I can't speak for other people. But because I'm outside the country, I'm a lot safer compared to those who are inside the country.
Yeah.
So, but the some of the uh, you know the risks are basically like threats to life, being kidnapped. So when I travel to Southeast Asia, you know I mean there are 10 countries in Southeast Asia. I can only go to 1 or 2 countries where I feel safe out of 10 countries, because Southeast Asia, as you know, is it is not a liberal region. Just about every single government is autocratic, dictatorship governments, from Singapore to like Thailand to Vietnam. Yeah. So, but in I live in UK, and so I live in relative safety.
Yeah, okay. As you know, Dr. Zarni, in September 2016, An advisory commission headed by Kofi Annan was established to sustain the peace and stop the massacre of the Rohingya Muslims. Actually, genocide, not massacre, but the genocide of Rohingya Muslims. So, do you think that this commission has been successful in its efforts?
No, the commission report
Mhm.
has been widely cited or referred to by virtually every single government. Yeah, but
Mhm.
mind you, Kofi Annan was a complete failure when it comes to issues involving genocide. Kofi Annan was head of the UN peacekeeping operations
Mhm.
based out of headquarters in New York.
Mhm.
And at the time of Rwanda genocide, Kofi Annan completely failed. And not only did he fail to intervene, he actually hid or concealed the telegram from Kigali, Rwanda's capital, where in the telegram, the head of the peacekeeping force on the ground in Rwanda warn him that there are signs of imminent genocide. Yeah, and Kofi Annan did not do anything because at the time that Bill Clinton was the U.S. president and Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State. Kofi Annan was very close. He was American educated man. He knew that Americans would not do anything. So he decided not to, annoy the Americans and let, however many hundreds of thousands of Rwanda be slaughtered. Yeah. So then, when he came to Burma, long after his retirement, he came as a basically consultant, you know, with the Aung San Suu Kyi government. Yeah, he was an independent consultant. He didn't go there as a statesman.
Mhm.
And so the first thing he did was, you know, comply with the terms that Aung San Suu Kyi laid out for their consultant engagement, and the terms of the agreement between Kofi Annan and Aung San Suu Kyi included a crucial violation of international law. That is, every single group with a distinct culture and linguistic tradition and ethnicity has a right to self-identify. Yeah, and so Rohingyas have the right to self-identify. And in addition, there's mounting historical and official documentation about their established identity. Kofi Annan comply with Suu Kyi's insistence that this victimized Muslim community be not identified as Rohingya. So that was the first violation of international norm and law by Kofi Annan Commission. And secondly, without he Kofi Annan declared that his commission was not to investigate human rights violations. Yeah, his commission was not there to find culprits and bring them to justice.
Yeah.
And despite his declared non-human rights commission, nature of the commission,
Mhm.
he was too bold to go ahead and say we should not call this genocide. Yeah, because that's too loaded. Yeah, you see, here's a situation where a very, very famous, retired Secretary General coming in, refusing to recognize Rohingya by their own ethnic identity, whereas in fact Ban Ki-moon, in his official capacity as Secretary General of the UN, said UN had no choice but to respect the international law. Respecting the international law in the case of Rohingya means calling them by their own name. And Kofi Annan did the complete opposite. And while dismissing, studies after studies that indicate that genocide is being committed. So, that was how he entered the Rohingya context. And with respect to his report, Aung San Suu Kyi used it as an international shield. Yeah. And then, like, there are, I don't know, about 90 recommendations or something that Kofi Annan Commission report included that the Aung San Suu Kyi government was supposed to implement. Yeah? And Aung San Suu Kyi and her deputies, basically lied to the world without like implementing some of the most crucial recommendations, like closing the camps that have been set up since 2012. That's like 8 years ago, where like 100,000 Muslim Rohingyas, mainly Rohingyas and other Muslims, they've been kept there without or against their will, in barbed wire camps. It's maybe not as severe as the Uyghur camps in Shanjin, China, but nonetheless, the New York Times and other who visited the camps call these camps, basically modern day concentration camps. And Suu Kyi didn't close them. And so the Kofi Annan report was a complete failure. I would even go so far as to say, in fact, it was not the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army attacks, yeah, that triggered the military response at the level of genocidal killings and destruction. It was the release of the Kofi Annan report, because the Burmese military had, from very day one, opposed Kofi Annan's involvement and his recommendations. And the Burmese military had a block, a 25% block of members of the parliament appointed constitutionally, not elected. These are military officers. 25% of the national parliament in Burma is allotted to the military officers. Yeah? And so this bloc and other military allied, the smaller parties, team up and introduce the legislation to basically stop Kofi Annan Commission. And because Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy have the overwhelming majority, they could override and defeat that bill. But my point is, the Burmese military leaders were deeply, deeply concerned about Kofi Annan's involvement, because he was known as the UN official who brought in this non-binding principle called responsibility to protect. So they did not want Kofi Annan to come and further internationalize the Rohingya issue, which they treat as a domestic issue. Yeah. So therefore, the 2 days after the release of the Kofi Annan report, the military used a small gang of militant Rohingyas as a pretext to launch the largest scale genocidal killing and destructions against Rohingyas in its 40 years of policies of persecution. So in fact, I, for one, would argue it was the Kofi Annan report that triggered the latest genocidal killings, not the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. The ARSA was just a pretext, but the real trigger was Kofi Annan report and its 90 recommendations that included granting citizens to Rohingya, which is something that the previous military governments had institutionalized. So here is a case where citizenship law was redrafted just so the Rohingyas could never live in Burma.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Zarni. And as a last point, you are the co-author of one article. It is called the slow burning genocide of Myanmar's Rohingyas. It was published in the Pacific Rim Law Policy Journal in 2014. This article characterizes the human rights abuses against Rohingya very well, perfectly, and as a slow burning genocide, as it is called in the article as a name. So you first used the word genocide in that monograph, which said the Myanmar government were trying to slowly eradicate the Rohingya as an ethnic cleansing. So in that monograph, I got some quotations. You use some quotations from the officials. For example, from Myanmar President Thein Sein at Chatham House. Myanmar President at Chatham House says that we don't have the term Rohingya. And on the other hand, Mr. Wing Mying, the official spokesperson of the Rakhine State government, he's saying that 2013, how can it be ethnic cleansing? They are not an ethnic group. So why do Myanmar officials always deny Rohingya Muslims as an ethnic group?
Right. Well, firstly, I deliberately avoid. I mean, my wife and a colleague, we avoid the term ethnic cleansing because we felt that that term is a whitewash or bleak, as the one of our senior colleagues, Gregory Stanton, put it, because he argued that ethnic cleansing was a public relations spin used by Milosevic, in his attempt to uh, argue against the genocide allegations when Serbia was instrumental in the Srebrenica and other killings of Bosniaks. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And you know this issue very well as well. So we stay away from the word ethnic cleansing and we go with genocide because there's a very well established international law, Genocide Convention, whereas in fact there is no such law in with respect to ethnic cleansing. But in terms of Thein Sein's the blatant dismissal of the existence of Rohingya as a group, historically and officially, and also the Rakhine official saying that it cannot be ethnic cleansing because there's no such ethnic group exist. I mean, I'll say this, you know, when Thein Sein, the president at the time, this was in 2000, I believe like 2013 in
13.
Chatham House, yeah, and when he was still a high school or middle school boy, my great uncle was the second highest commander in Rakhine State, deputy commander with the rank of major. And in those days, the Burmese armed forces only had a handful of colonels and brigadiers and other middle or the middle level officers were the majors. And then he was at the ceremony, peace ceremony. In other words, Rohingya armed resistance group that existed at the time in 1961. My great uncle was one of the key hosts for this peace ceremony that was attended by the highest level of military officers, including brigadier generals and others from the general staff. The Rohingyas were recognized in writing official speeches in the Burmese language encyclopedia, yeah? And this is official, and that the Rohingyas were also recognized in historical writings going back to say like the 18th century. Yeah, so facts are on the side of the Rohingya. Yeah, and but we can argue that the Rohingya population grew through intermarriages, and there are other ethnic other members of ethnic communities that came into contact with Rohingya and assumed Rohingya identity. But because ethnicity is a construction, and so people come in and out of ethnic labels, so that's not an issue. But the problem is when the highest officials and politicians and leaders of Burma blatantly attempt to erase facts. Yeah? And it would be like saying that slavery never existed. Yeah? Whereas in fact you could see descendants of slaves walking around. It would be like arguing that the British never colonized any country, and the wealth that Britain accumulated was through honest trade. We knew that factually these are completely wrong. Yeah, but there are other so basically this denial of ethnicity,
Mm.
which cannot be proven completely unsupported by facts,
Mm.
is motivated by the fear, or at least the popular and now official fear on the part of the Burmese politicians and generals and monks, that if Rohingyas were recognized as Rohingyas, at some point they would demand independence, or they would demand their own state, and joined with Bangladesh. Yeah? So they associate the official recognition of Rohingya ethnic identity with the potential attempt by Rohingyas to leave Burma and become part of Bangladesh, or to set up a new independent state. But that is a paranoia. Paranoia does not correspond to actual realities on the ground. We have 20 ethnic armed organizations, including Arakan Army. Yeah? And Arakan Army openly fights for independence right now. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And there are also in northern and eastern Burma other ethnic groups that have the label independence. Yeah? Say, for instance, Kachin, right below the southern Chinese province of Yunnan. The Kachins have been fighting for independence since 1964. And we, as the public in Burma, and the Burmese government and the military, still call them Kachin. No one argued that we have to stop recognizing Kachin identity because they're fighting for independence. So basically, what it boils down to is the Burmese Islamophobia. But as you know, Islamophobia is a new form of fascism. Yeah? And so that when you adopt that kind of fascist perspective, facts don't matter. So everything they say, I can prove just about every single major statement the Burmese government, both the generals and Aung San Suu Kyi, has pronounced in the last 8 years is completely false. And actually, they are criminally responsible for framing the Rohingya as a threat to Burmese national security, whereas in fact they are the ones who are a threat to both the general public in Burma and obviously the most destructive factor in the case of the lives of Rohingyas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Thank you, Dr. Zarni. It's my privilege to host you for this podcast. My sincere regards from Turkey to United Kingdom. See you soon. Take care of yourself. Bye.